My parents chose to come to the United States from living under military occupation in Palestine. And you talk about going into a grocery store in Arlington, Virginia, because you speak Arabic and you understand the culture, and that's where you get your credibility from. I understand the culture and I speak the language too. And I've never, ever walked into a grocery store or into a hookah lounge or into a community center or a mosque in this country where people were saying that they wanted to destroy America.
Before we even get into it, you need to see this. A Palestinian woman just obliterated pro-Israel shill Brigitte Gabriel so brutally on live TV that even the CNN host had to step in, and trust me, it only gets crazier the longer it goes. I'm talking full intellectual knockout, hypocrisy exposed, fear-mongering shredded, the whole facade collapsing in real time. So do not click away. Watch this until the very end, because after you see how she dismantles Brigitte line by line, I'm going to break down exactly why this moment is so important and why it scared every Zionist propagandist out there. But before we dive in, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? I love seeing how global this community is, and if you support truth over propaganda, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications because what you're about to hear changes everything.
15 to 25% are radicalized. Now, not every single one of them wants to blow himself up, but they either support terrorists who want to blow themselves up, provide them with financing, provide them for money, provide them with logistical support. That statistic comes from the Israelis.
Miss Gabriel speaks out of two sides of her mouth. I mean, first of all, she's in one breath she'll say the West must support moderate Muslims and the moderate Muslims must speak up against terrorism. And in the same breath, she'll say peaceful Muslims are irrelevant. Miss Gabriel needs to make up her mind when it comes to what is radical. She said a radical Muslim is someone who prays 5 times a day, someone who believes in the word of the Quran, which is the Muslim holy book, someone who believes the Prophet Muhammad, may peace be upon him, is a perfect man. That's basically every Muslim. So I have no idea what she means. Where is the room for moderate Islam?
What I deal with as a terrorism analyst, the moderate Muslims, they can organize. Where are their collective voices? Where are the voices of the moderate Muslims speaking when girls kidnapped by Boko Haram?
There are people out there that stood up on Boko Haram, on terrorism, on 9/11. There are national Muslim organizations who continue day in and day out to put out statements. Is the media covering it? I don't have control over the media to cover these stories, and I don't have to prove to anyone that I am an American born and raised in Brooklyn, New York, and that my parents chose to come to the United States from living under military occupation in Palestine. And you talk about going into a grocery store in Arlington, Virginia, because you speak Arabic and you understand the culture, and that's where you get your credibility from. I understand the culture and I speak the language too, and I've never ever walked into a grocery store or into a hookah lounge or into a community center or a mosque in this country where people were saying that they wanted to destroy America.
We know what is being put out. There has been a study after study of the material that have been found.
Are you a terrorism analyst on terrorism in general? What about the Las Vegas shooting, the manifestos, the Oak Creek shooting where white supremacists walked into a Gurdwara and killed 6 people?
I immigrated to the United States and I continued having the Middle East as my focus. And that's what I talk about. That is something we need to discuss and
Will we not look back at this era as a gross overreaction to a terrorist threat that is not there in the way you're describing it to be?
The terrorist threat has been there, Brian, for years. America has been attacked by radical Islamists, whether we had a Democrat or a Republican.
And by people who have twisted Christianity into their own beliefs as well.
I agree with you. I agree with you. There are extremists on both sides.
Let's look at the Boston bombing. The first front page story came out on the New York Post of 2 young Algerian boys with book bags, calling them the bagmen. Immediately when an incident happens in this country that includes someone who just happens to be of an Arab country of origin or Muslim, we immediately start talking about terrorism and domestic terrorism. And when we have the same cases, similar cases, shootings almost every week in this country where dozens of people are being killed at the hands of guns and lax gun control, I'm more worried about getting shot by a gun or by a shooter in the U.S. than I am from a terrorist attack. The media does play a role in this, but it also gives, again, the platform to people who are pseudo-experts. And just because you grew up in the Middle East and just because you supposedly lived under a war doesn't make you a terrorism analyst. There are people who have extensive training in this area and at the same time can talk about very fringe terrorism without talking about Islam as a religion being a threat. The fastest growing religion in the country. And what Miss Gabriel and her friends don't say is that many of the foiled plots that in this country have been foiled by information that came directly from the community.
We're talking about, as two Americans, about how we can protect our country. We are both faced with an enemy wishing both our destruction. When those people attacked the World Trade Center, they wanted to kill Americans, Muslims, Christians, and everybody. We're talking about the mass killing of thousands of Americans, if not millions.
Isn't that fear-mongering? To use the words like thousands and millions, isn't that fear-mongering?
The idea here is that you want to talk about terrorism, let's talk about terrorism, and let's be prepared. But let's not prepare the American people that all terrorism that happens around the world comes from the Muslim community. That's the point that I want to debate with you here.
Well,
is that the idea here that terrorism is a serious issue, but terrorism does not equal Islam. It does not equal Muslims. I am from New York. I live in New York. I was here in New York on 9/11, Ms. Gabriel. I understand the impact that 9/11 had on communities in New York City. I could have been in the World Trade Center. I could be dead here today. There were Muslim responders. There were Muslims. 75 Muslims died in 9/11, including a first responder, Salman Hamdani. So I want you to understand that if you want to combat terrorism, you need to work within the Muslim community. You need to make sure that we are part of that discussion. And the, quote, moderate Muslims that you're talking about, which are almost every Muslim living here in this country, need to be part of this discussion. But to alienate the Muslim community, create them as the other, and to start making over-exaggerations about these potential attacks that haven't happened is not the way that you combat terrorism in any country, and especially not here in the United States.
We're talking about now Islamic terrorism. When you're watching the news this morning and you're hearing about terrorists in Syria, in Jordan, in Lebanon, in Sudan, in Nigeria, in Chad, in Libya, the radicals who want to kill us, who are using the Quran as their source and justification.
As long as you clarify and you stand up and say that the fringe extremists of any faith are only a tiny minority in the larger faith, this is what we want you to talk about. When you talk about Islam and you talk about the Quran, you just got to make sure that you're being specific when you talk about terrorism of any faith.
What makes this moment so satisfying is not just that a Palestinian woman shut down Brigitte Gabriel, it's the way she did it. Calm, poised, razor sharp, and so effortlessly human that Brigitte looked like she was malfunctioning under the pressure. Brigitte walked into that studio with her usual script: fear-mongering, statistics pulled from thin air, and that fake "I grew up in the Middle East, therefore I'm an expert" badge she's been flashing for decades. And for the first time in a long time, someone didn't let her slip away with it. Someone didn't smile politely while she painted 2 billion people as a threat. Someone actually pushed back. And that someone was a Palestinian-American woman who wasn't having a single ounce of Brigitte's nonsense. Brigitte started, as she always does, by trying to inflate the idea that Muslims are somehow lurking around every corner, waiting to blow up America. She threw out that infamous line claiming that 15 to 25% of Muslims are radicalized, a number so ridiculous and clearly fabricated that even the CNN host's eyebrows nearly flew off his face. But the Palestinian sister didn't raise her voice, didn't get emotional. She simply dismantled the nonsense piece by piece. She pointed out that Brigitte can't even define what she means by radical, because according to Brigitte's own past statements, a radical Muslim is basically every Muslim. Someone who prays 5 times a day? Radical. Someone who reads the Quran? Radical. Someone who believes the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, is a moral example? Radical. In other words, someone who practices the religion at all. So when Brigitte claims to want moderate Muslims, what she really means are Muslims who don't actually follow Islam. Muslims who can be palatable props for her narrative. Muslims who exist only to stroke her ego and validate her bigotry. It's such an obvious contradiction that the sister called it out immediately. How do you demand moderates to speak up while simultaneously labeling all moderates as extremists? It's clownish logic, and you could see the moment Brigitte realized she'd backed herself into her own corner. She tried to wiggle out by claiming she's a terrorism analyst. But again, the sister caught the lie in real time. Because anyone can call themselves an analyst, that doesn't mean they are one. So when the Palestinian sister pressed her, why do you only talk about Muslim extremists? Why do you never mention white supremacists? Why not the Las Vegas shooter? Why not the guy who walked into a Sikh Gurdwara and murdered people? Brigitte completely folded. She admitted, live on air, that she focuses on the Middle East. Translation: she only cares when the perpetrator is Muslim. She doesn't study violence. She doesn't study extremism. She studies Islam. She studies Muslims. Her entire career is built on reducing a diverse global community to a threat. The Palestinian sister exposed Brigitte's hypocrisy even more when she pointed out that moderate Muslims do speak up. Constantly. Muslim organizations across the world release statements after every major attack. Imams condemn extremists regularly. Educational programs exist in almost every Western Muslim community to teach youth about peaceful principles. But how would the public know any of this when the media refuses to cover it? The sister made it clear. Muslims have condemned everything from Boko Haram to ISIS to 9/11 itself. But the mainstream media isn't interested in covering peace. Peace doesn't sell ads, fear does. And this is where the sister's personal story hit hard. She mentioned her parents came to America from Palestine, fleeing actual military occupation. Real extremism, real violence. Something Brigitte conveniently ignores even though her own country, Lebanon, was torn apart partly because of Israeli invasions, proxy conflicts, and occupations. Yet Brigitte never touches that topic. She never critiques the IDF, never talks about Israeli war crimes, never discusses the decades of bloodshed they've caused in the region. Her expertise seems to magically stop when extremism is committed by those she supports politically. Then the Palestinian sister hit her with something that made Brigitte visibly uncomfortable. She said she also speaks Arabic. She also understands the culture. She also grew up in a Middle Eastern household. So Brigitte's "I know these people, trust me" shtick doesn't work here. She couldn't hide behind her token Arab persona anymore. She was sitting in front of an actual Arab Muslim woman who lived the culture Brigitte pretends to be an expert on. And that's why Brigitte's entire performance crumbled. The sister also pointed out something that should be obvious, but somehow needs repeating. She has never walked into a Muslim community center, mosque, hookah lounge, grocery store, nothing, and heard anyone plotting to kill Americans. Because average Muslims are just normal people living their lives, working, raising families, paying bills, struggling, laughing, eating, existing. Yet people like Brigitte build entire careers out of inventing monsters where there are none. When the CNN host stepped in and pressed Brigitte about her fear-mongering, she panicked. She kept using phrases like the mass killing of thousands, if not millions, of Americans. Millions. She actually said millions, as if there's some secret Muslim master plan to wipe out the entire country. The host could barely hide his disbelief. The Palestinian sister laughed. And honestly, who wouldn't? Because not only is it absurd, but it's wildly hypocritical. If we're talking about mass killing of innocent people, the U.S. invasion of Iraq alone wiped out over 1 million Muslims. That wasn't Muslims killing Americans. That was America killing Muslims. But people like Brigitte never bring that up because it ruins their entire narrative. The sister then dropped one of the most important points in the entire debate. Muslims weren't just suspects on 9/11. They were also victims. 75 Muslims died in the World Trade Center. Muslim firefighters, Muslim paramedics, Muslim office workers. One of the first responders who died was a Muslim, Salman Hamdani. But that part of the history never fits the script pushed by fearmongers like Brigitte. Because if the public knew the truth, that Muslims were both victims and heroes, it would break the illusion they've worked so hard to create. The sister explained that if Brigitte truly cared about eliminating extremism, she would work with Muslim communities, not against them. The Muslim community is the #1 source of tips that foil extremist plots. Muslims report extremists more than anyone else. They cooperate with authorities. They protect the country they live in. But how can you build trust with a community you're constantly demonizing? This is where Brigitte's intentions become crystal clear. She isn't interested in fighting extremism. She's interested in fighting Islam. Her worldview is simple. Israel good, Muslims bad. That's why she listed a bunch of countries: Syria, Jordan, Lebanon, Sudan, Nigeria, Libya, claiming all their violence is somehow tied to Islam. Coincidentally, many of those countries have been destabilized by Western intervention or Israeli involvement. But Brigitte wants people to believe everything wrong in the Middle East comes from Muslims and Muslims alone. It's Propaganda 101. The Palestinian sister shut that down quickly. She explained that extremists exist in every religion, every race, every ideology, but the overwhelming majority of Muslims are just regular people living quiet, peaceful lives. Islam forbids extremism. The Quran explicitly condemns killing. The Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, spoke constantly about mercy, compassion, justice, and honoring life. So when Brigitte uses the words Islamic extremism, she's contradicting herself. Islam and extremism are opposites. They can't coexist. By the end of the segment, Brigitte looked frustrated, exposed, and intellectually exhausted. Even CNN, a network not exactly known for being soft on Muslims, couldn't cover for her. Every time she reached for another rehearsed line, the sister dismantled it with real-world facts, experience, and common sense. She didn't raise her voice once. She didn't need to. The truth spoke loudly enough. What made the takedown so satisfying wasn't aggression or theatrics. It was honesty. It was clarity. It was someone finally saying, no, you don't get to lie about us, and walk away smiling. And that's why this moment resonated so deeply. Because it showed the power of speaking plainly. It showed the impact of refusing to be dehumanized. It showed that one person armed with truth can make an entire propaganda machine glitch in real time. And in that moment, Brigitte Gabriel wasn't facing some caricature she built in her head. She wasn't facing a stereotype she could talk over. She was facing a real Muslim woman who knew the culture better than her, the language better than her, the politics better than her, and the truth better than her. And that's why she got obliterated.